you're cool that all these people are here for me, right?
Absolutely.
Because it's, you know, it's NYU, and so it's
I understand.
It's my readers, so.
Of course.
How are you doing? You're doing a lot more events than I am. You've been everywhere.
Well, I'm glad to be here with you. I'm very tired. There's new meaning to the word tired, but this is very enjoyable, very satisfying.
When you get an entrance like that everywhere you go, it's pretty satisfying, right? I don't always get an entrance like that, but...
yeah, it's very nice.
So I said I was going to start, I gave you my surprise question that I was going to start with. But it is a subject that we sometimes talk about or talk around, but we kind of take a lot of it for granted. Are you a horror novelist?
Yeah, I would say I'm a horror novelist.
Okay, why?
Well, because vampire novels fall into that genre, horror.
Okay.
I don't object to it.
You don't object to the label?
Not at all. I don't have any problems with being labeled any kind of writer at all.
Any kind of writer? Any kind of writer.
Well, you know what I've come to realize is the labels just don't matter.
Okay.
That the readers get the book, and they decide what the genre is.
Right.
And that's fine with me. And
right.
I think all authors really don't mind if genre is going to help people find their work. But if they think genre is going to limit the audience or be a stumbling block to people finding their work, then they get scared of the word genre.
Right. Did you begin with a genre label? Did you have a sense when you published Interview with the Vampire that this book should be described as a blank book?
Not at all. I was totally against it at that time, and nobody would have thought of it. I mean, Knopf published Interview with the Vampire as a mainstream novel.
Right.
And there wasn't, the word horror didn't even come into the equation. Nobody mentioned the word horror.
Was it? I honestly don't know the answer to this. I don't just pretend to play dumb so that it looks like an interview. Although I do have home field advantage, so I know where the good questions are.
Yeah.
But was the original cover that gold with the,
yes.
Okay.
Yeah, it was a gold foil cover, and it had that very striking and distinctive print.
Right.
And it was all type, you know, no picture or anything.
No illustration of anything.
Nothing. And it was a beautiful publication. They did a wonderful job.
Right, you know? But later there was a paperback edition that actually had models posing as Lestat, Louis, and Claudia.
That's right.
It was white.
That's right. And yes, and as so often happens, the person who did the cover had never read the book, and the models did not look like Louis and Lestat. Yeah. And Claudia on the cover was not 6 years old. She was about 13 or 14.
Right.
But it was still a very interesting cover, and that was the Ballantine paperback cover.
Right.
Yeah.
And so I wonder, was that edition sort of after, it was later, so was there a decision later that this was going to be pegged as a certain type of book?
No, I don't think so. Let's see, Ballantine book came out within about 9 months or a year of the hardcover book.
Right.
And I don't recall their saying horror on the jacket either. They just put it out there as a leader, as they called it, you know, for the month. And it did fairly well in paperback. It did better in paperback than it had done in hardcover, actually.
Oh, okay.
Interview with the Vampire was not a success in hardcover.
Right.
It was too weird, I think. People just didn't know what to make of it, truly, and it did not do all that well.
Right.
It had a dignified publication, and it got quite a few very, very good reviews. But it really didn't go over, so to speak. It didn't take off. It didn't become a bestseller. Then in paperback it did, and it stayed. Then it went sort of underground and stayed as a backlist book for years.
Right.
Until I finally wrote The Vampire Lestat, and that was my first hardcover bestseller. That was 8 or 9 years later.
Right. And a lot of people don't know that. I was sharing two memories earlier today with a friend. One was that when I was about 5 years old, you called the school and said you were coming to pick me up and that you had very exciting news, which I thought meant candy.
Yeah.
And instead it was that Cry to Heaven was being published, which as a 5-year-old I couldn't quite wrap my head around. I was like, yeah, that's great, is there candy?
I know.
And the other one was the phone call from Knopf in the kitchen of our house at 3887 17th Street in the Castro district when you found out that The Vampire Lestat had debuted at number 9 on the New York Times bestseller list. And I just remember you going, number 9? Number 9? No, it was a great moment and I'll never forget it.
Yeah, well, I was very excited because it was my first hardcover bestseller, and I'd been writing steadily for a long time by then. That was 9 years after Interview, and I really didn't know that I'd ever be a hardcover bestseller, and I knew the name of the game was just to keep writing. So when that news came, it was very exciting. I didn't expect it at all.
So at what point did you decide that you were essentially going to take the villain of Interview with the Vampire and make the entire chronicle center around him, which is Lestat? Because as we know him in Interview, and the only Lestat we've ever really seen done well on film is that version of Lestat. Hopefully we will be changing that very soon in terms of Hollywood. But, when did you decide he was the one as opposed to Louis?
You know, I don't think I ever made a clear decision. I remember after I finished Interview, I thought I would like to tell this story from Lestat's point of view and see what his take on things would be. But I just knew when I wanted to go back and do another book, I wanted it to be Lestat's book. Mm-hmm. And I can't remember a decision so much as just a feeling about that character and a love for that character. And then as he began to speak and develop, I became more Lestat than I had ever been Louis, really.
Right.
And I wasn't prepared for it, but it wasn't a matter of decision. It was more a matter of discovery.
Do you wince a little bit when somebody describes him as the villain of Interview with the Vampire? Did you feel that way when you were writing Interview with the Vampire?
I thought he was the villain. I thought he was an antagonist, I guess. You know, he was one of those characters that really developed in the corner of my eye. I never thought about him. I was so focused on the story of Louis, the melancholy and broken-hearted vampire who was telling the story, that the bad guy who was always disappointing him really wasn't my focus.
Right.
But I had a consciousness somewhere that Louis was being very unfair to Lestat, that the story was about a character who was deeply unhappy and incapable of acting, and I guess what we call today passive-aggressive, and that he was very wrong about Lestat. And there is a point in the book where Louis himself admits that. I have hated him for all the wrong reasons. And he has a moment, I think, of really missing him.
Yeah, excellent.
Yeah.
I want to know, and this is actually a question I have never asked you, at what point did you come up with the origin story? Was it before you began sitting down to write Vampire Lestat that you knew the mother of all vampires had ruled in a time before ancient? You're just shaking your head like, I came up with the origin story? I still don't know what it is.
No, I discover things like that in the process of writing, and I hope that answer doesn't disappoint people, but it really is the way that I go. I had no idea what the origin story was going to be until Marius started to tell it to Lestat, and I discovered it. And it feels to me when I'm writing, I'm so in the story, it's so spontaneous for me, it's so instinctive, I'm so completely letting it take me over that it does feel like I'm channeling it from someplace else. But the words just begin to flow, and actually the whole section of the Vampire Lestat, in which Marius does tell the origin story, was written in a very brief period of time. It was like a huge, about 11 days. But it was like a big outpouring of 300 pages in 11 days' time. And I did not know where it was going to come from. You know, I just was digging down into myself, asking, I guess, that the explanation be very exciting, that it not be disappointing, and going deep into history and deep into what I knew of archaeology and mythology to try to work out a story for where these creatures had come from. But I always worked this way. I mean, one of the things about the Vampire Chronicles that I think is very maddening to some readers is they're not organized. It's not an organized series. I don't know.
Wait, what do you mean? I mean, they're in books, right?
No. What I mean is there are people today who are writing series who apparently do know everything that's going to happen before they start.
Right.
They do plan it. You know, like they know Dumbledore before they get to him, and it's all mapped out.
I remember when you went on the Oprah Winfrey Show years ago, and you were on with Jean Ahl, who wrote the Clan of the Cape series, and she said, I was standing at the refrigerator one day and all the books came to me and you were like, wow, I wish they'd come to me at the refrigerator. All I get is a tab.
I said that?
Yeah, you said that, you know, but they come to you the way they come to you, and I think it's interesting because you said, I don't think it disappoints people to hear you say that, because I think, especially if people have had bad experiences in learning communities about writing or with writing teachers, they've been told that unless they've plotted out every single detail, then they're not ready to begin writing, and that's just not true. Whatever works for you is what works for you.
Yeah,
and if you listen to enough writers share their experiences about it, you'll find that nobody has exactly the same approach. Stephen King doesn't outline. You don't outline. I know a lot of writers who don't outline. No. I'm an outliner. I need to sort of have a sense of really where I'm headed, not every zig and zag on the way there. Yeah.
So you outlined the vines, your new book?
I did outline the vines.
You actually, when you say outline, how detailed an outline?
It's not that detailed,
but
it's
like
just
points, a list of points.
It's you know, the only formal writing training I ever had, aside from being your son, it was in the dramatic writing program at NYU. It was screenwriting and playwriting. It was about doing as much as you possibly could with as little time and as few pages as you had. And that really that brought a burden or an outlining sort of habit with it. So that's something. But there are moments that you can never plan. There are unexpected things that happen.
Exactly, and no matter if I do start with a roadmap, I'm waiting, not waiting for, but I'm welcoming the surprises and the upsets. And the thing, I really believe as writers that's one of the most exciting parts of the job for us. You know, starting out and having a character truly come to life, as the cliche says, and then things start to pop and happen, and the characters can take over a book.
So what have been some of the biggest surprises for you?
Well, Lestat certainly was a big surprise, that this villainous person that wasn't supposed to appreciate anything about being a vampire turned out to be the hero of all the books I would write after Interview with the Vampire. And I was also surprised that I was never really able to get with Louis again in the same way that I did in the first book. I am getting more with Louis now in Prince Lestat. And
Louis has, I think, one of the greatest scenes in Prince Lestat. I won't spoil it because it comes close to the end, but it's fantastic.
Yeah. Well, that was a breakthrough for me, and that was a surprise. You know.
Right.
But I'm so committed to that method of finding the book on the page and tunneling into the work. I don't really think much about it, except I'm very aware that other people may do it very differently.
Right. Well, you talk about that a lot, particularly when we do events like this, that there is no one true way to write, and that a lot of people that you talk to, particularly on Facebook, because you're very big on social media and you communicate with people a lot who are beginning to write, and you find that a lot of them have been discouraged from writing. And that was one thing you said to me early on, is that you were told very early on that you were not a real writer because you didn't write every day.
Right.
You didn't do all these things. And
I was told many times that in one way or another that I wouldn't be a success in anything.
And anything?
Well, pretty much. I mean, I was a very disorganized, bad student.
You know, in college? This was
high school, college, grammar school, and going all the way back. You know,
kindergarten.
I was a daydreamer and a person who pretty much learned outside of the normal framework of school.
But isn't not to toot your horn too much here, but isn't that the story of almost every exceptional person on Earth? Is that there were a bunch of douchebag teachers who told them they would never amount to anything? I'm in New York. I can curse. They're wonderful teachers as well, but you talk to James Lee Burke, same thing. He had writing teachers who said, you're never gonna, I mean, why say that to anyone?
I don't know, but there are people who do feel that is their obligation.
Yeah.
You know, I participate a lot in the Amazon forums, and I get in discussions with people. The why is not entirely clear, but there is one person in the forums who says again and again that somebody needs to tell people when they have no talent, and they need to be told that they're just not writers. So, and that person, by the way, I think is a school teacher. So this is an idea that many people have. I would say to anybody who wants to be a writer, your first job is to ignore anybody who tells you you can't do it. Don't take no for an answer from anyone.
Right.
You know, never.
Because how do you, like, who decides the final arbiter?
I know.
I mean, that's why it's so hard to give up as an artist, because you never know what's around the next corner.
Well, I remember when I went into freshman English years ago, many years ago, in college, the teacher started off by saying, let's establish now that there are no Faulkners and no Hemingways in this classroom. Well, this was her point. Her point was she wanted us to write manageable sentences.
Yeah.
And see, so one of the reasons I think people give you this advice is they want you to behave. They want to teach you how to do the proper thing that's expected of you, and they don't want to hear that you think of yourself as exceptional, or you're aiming for the for the stars, or you want to bring down the fire from heaven. They want you to learn the rules. And I remember at the time being very offended by that, the idea. I wasn't about to say that to myself, there's no Faulkner or Hemingway in this classroom. I thought it was a very offensive idea.
There was an Anne Rice in that classroom, so what did it matter?
I got a B, by the way, in that class.
You got a B, so you did great. There are some things you can do.
I didn't make an A.
A B is fine. I think that's, the focus is usually on that because those are the things that can be taught. Voice and talent can't necessarily be taught, but I think great teachers unleash the voice that's there, right? And the approach that I'm a bigger fan of is learn the rules so you can break them, right? You learn the rules first so that you can throw them out later when they're not of use to you.
Right. Yeah. And then there are educators, though, that I think do a great deal to work with people who have. I know my older sister Alice Borchardt became a novelist, and she published about she published about 6 or 7 books before she died. And Alice was published by Ballantine, same publisher that does most of my paperbacks. And Alice was a person that had a terrible time in school. She was highly intelligent, but she really was handicapped almost when it came to expressing herself. And I remember one of the sisters in high school, one of the nuns, got Alice to write book reviews for the school paper and actually helped her with the mechanics of the English language, because Alice spoke beautifully, but she just didn't know where to put the period or the comma. And I'll never forget that sister for doing that, for a sister. And later Alice went to the state competition in the subject of history, and she came in second in the state. And I remember the principal, who was also a nun, saying to me, they would die if they knew that we sent a D student to the Capitol for that competition. But they believed in her, and they understood her problems. And she later became a very, very respected novelist, and her handwriting and her skills at punctuation were so bad that she had to dictate her work and have somebody type it. And so I have to say, and I think of those nuns in a tender way, that they believed in her back then. Yeah, absolutely. They're wonderful stories. But how much do you think you grew up in a household of storytelling? Your mother was a great storyteller. Your father was a great storyteller. Irish Catholic households have a long tradition of telling stories about how everyone died. Do you think that instilled something fundamental in you and in Alice at an early age that came flowered later? Yes, I do think the whole family was gifted with that ability to tell stories. And it isn't just that we told stories, we kind of thought in terms of story. Everything was a story. And I grew up listening to adults talk and tell stories to each other. And my mother would, when she would take us for a walk in the Garden District in New Orleans, she would have stories about all the houses we passed. She'd tell us some pretty gruesome ghost stories, weird things that had happened, stories about eccentrics. New Orleans is a city of eccentrics and characters. And she was always filling her head with these wonderful narratives. And that got into me. But something else that influenced me a lot, which I guess is something you had no experience of really, was radio. I grew up in the age of radio before TV, and radios were going in every room of the house when I was a child. And radio programming in the evening was almost all dramatic storytelling. The Lux Radio Theater, Suspense, The Inner Sanctum. These were great shows that presented a drama of some kind almost every night. And they were there was something we don't have the equivalent of today in TV. We have series that are wonderful, but we don't have those dramas that they would put on. Every week. You do remember that you're going to be on my radio show this Sunday, right? Oh yes, absolutely. Absolutely. But I know exactly what you mean, and we took a road trip to San Francisco to do an event together, and you bought all of these old radio plays. And who was it, the Green Hornet? Is that who we were listening to? Well, one of them, but I was listening to a show called Broadway Is My Beat with the detective Danny Clover. And it was a wonderful, poetic old radio show from the 40s, right before the Dragnet plain speech era came in. And Danny Clover, the detective, sort of film noir guy, would speak in a very florid and poetic way about what it was like to be a policeman in New York. And there was always some jazz in the background, some very mournful jazz. And I grew up just loving that stuff. Because you have to tell the entire story through words. You have to. The whole story is words. And it's parts of it feel a little
dated when you listen to it today. Like, well, let me take off these blue glasses and put this brown jacket up on this hook and walk left. You know, because they're giving you so much to make you see all of it. But as a writer, it's a fascinating thing to study.
It was
if
great.
you weren't influenced by it, like
it was great,
you
and I'm sure it had a profound influence on me. And I remember going through a period when I was a kid of trying to write radio drama, you know, in longhand.
Well, if you want to write anything for my radio show, we'll be happy to run it, Miss Rice.
I'm going to do that. I'll take you up on it. I'm going to write a horror series for your radio show.
I'll do it.
A 15-minute serial for every Sunday episode.
I'm in. I'm in. I think Eric Shaw Quinn would be in as well.
Okay.
All right, so let's talk about movies.
Yes.
So we are going to do another movie, right?
Yes, Universal Studios and Imagine Entertainment.
Hold for applause.
Okay. They have bought the rights to the Vampire Chronicles, and they have hired Christopher, my son, to do the screenplay, and I'm so happy about that.
I gave a great pitch. I gave a great audition meeting, and they were just bowled over. No, it's an interesting story because they didn't want to do it, and you convinced me to do it.
Yeah, we had been in negotiations with Imagine for about 5 years, and we did not have a studio on board, and they wanted to do the Vampire Chronicles, they wanted to do The Tale of the Body Thief, and they did manage to hire a scriptwriter who had done a script that I felt, he was a very nice guy, and it was a very well put together script, but it simply wasn't the Vampire Chronicles, and it wasn't Tale of the Body Thief, and it certainly wasn't Lestat and Louis. And I showed this to you, and I asked you, I said, would you just do this script on spec? Do it. Show them what you could do. Let me take the script to them and show it to them. And you were convinced that they would never take you seriously and never hire you. But you, go ahead.
Now we're going to hear my version of the story, which goes like this, which is you had asked me to get involved a lot sooner when there was no writer involved.
Right.
And I said, I'm not going to do that. They will probably bring some big writer on board. I don't have any resume in Hollywood. All I've done are books and magazine articles. And so I bowed out early on, and then I read that script and I called you and I said, I'll do it.
Yeah, because you saw...
Because the problem, it's not the problem, but the great challenge of doing your vampire books for film, right, is that Hollywood gets its hand on something, or a major studio does, and their first thought is, how can we make the version of this that is the most mass appeal? And if you approach your vampires in that way, you have from the get-go completely negated everything you brought to the genre and to those stories. Right. And so you have to stop, you have to get in there early and stop them from doing that, which is not easy. You have to say that these are soulful, complicated, you know, characters that you have to do justice to the same way you would in something Shakespearean or you know, a thriller.
Right. Exactly. Well, you did the script, basically, and what happened?
Don't leave out the next part, which
we both put our names on it.
The agent said we both had to put our names on it.
Yeah, our agent said they won't let Chris do it unless you both do it together. So we said, okay, we'll do it together. And I functioned as a producer, more or less, on the script. And Chris,
a mother.
You wrote, well, yes. And you wrote the script, and you wrote every word of it.
Yes.
There was not a word of it that was changed by me. I never put pen to paper. It didn't happen. So they took that script to Universal Studios, and Universal Studios came on board for the first time. We got the call finally after the years of struggling. They want to do it. They're on board with Imagine to do this Tale of the Body Thief. And at that point, I took my name off it. I said, it's Christopher's script. He wrote it, and my name's coming off. And now we are going to be sitting down with them finally in creative talks this December. And I'm going to get a chance to explain to everybody what I think the readers of this material want in a film.
And explain to us, what's the movie you want to see?
Well, they bought everything. I kind of insisted that they buy everything, that we not do this book by book, that they take all the books, including Prince Lestat, and we've crafted a really great contract to make that work for everybody's advantage. And I guess, let me ask you, those of you who have read these books, what, I guess because you can't all answer.
We're going to go one at a time, starting here. What book do you want to see made into a movie?
Well, I guess that's not going to work.
I'm not the devil. This is chaos. Oh,
Okay, but you hear people saying Memnoch the Devil.
Memnoch the Devil,
Yeah.
okay.
Okay, but I think what we should start with, if we're starting over again, is we should start with the Vampire Lestat.
I agree.
And we should Thank you. I just had a thought of what it would be like right now in Hollywood if they knew we were having this conversation.
You know what? They will. There's a little thing called Facebook. I don't know if you've heard of it. And Twitter. But
I guess I
what we're going to do is we're going to bring all of these lovely people to the meeting that we're having in December. They'll be right. We brought some friends. Yeah.
We'll ask to have a meeting, but we won't say how many people are going to be there. We'll bring 1,000 readers of the book.
This is why video conferencing was invented. And we'll turn in the middle of the meeting and ask everybody what they want to see next, and they'll say every single book in the Chronicles. But tonight it's Memnoch the Devil. Okay.
Well, I heard one voice saying Memnoch the Devil, but
I heard several voices say Memnoch the
Devil. Well, that is a very popular book. I'm glad to hear it because it's one of the weirdest, you know. One of the most excessive and eccentric and strange.
But what I'm going to refine the question. What type of movie do you want to see next? Which character do you want to see done the most deeply on screen? You know, what other movies do you think would be comparisons?
I tell you, what I have always wanted was a lush, sensuous, profound costume movie in period about Lestat, his life, his story, and I've always wanted it to move like an action thriller. And I've wanted him to emerge as a debonair, dashing vampire hero who's also the James Bond of the vampires. That's what I've always wanted. Always wanted that.
James Bond of the vampires.
Yeah, he calls himself that in the book, The Vampire Lestat.
Right.
And I absolutely meant that line, and that's how I see all these characters. That's how I see the books. I see them as very exciting and thrilling, and I've always wanted them to have that kind of direction on the screen. You know, almost a thriller-like direction. And I think we may get something like that this time.
Yeah.
I think we may. Hollywood's not the place it was 20 years ago or 10 years ago when Interview was made and Queen of the Damned was made. You know.
Yes.
Interview, by the way, I think was a great movie, really, thanks to Neil Jordan and David Geffen, who pulled all the stops out in making it. And I don't think it should be remade. I think it's very, very good, just the way it is, actually.
Right.
Yeah.
What movie do you not want to see?
What movie do I not? I don't want to see a fictional movie just using the names of my characters written by a producer.
Blade Part 6 with Anne Rice's character.
Exactly. I would rather not. I mean, if it's going to be so fictionalized that they don't, you know, or so fictionalized in somebody else's way that just don't bother to use my work.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Okay,
You know?
we'll make it work. We'll figure it out. We'll bring all these people. It'll be fine. It'll be fine. So I was going to ask you today. I know the answer to this question. Interview with the Vampire is a success for you. The movie, like you consider it ultimately a rewarding experience.
I thought it was a great success at the time. I mean, it was a very painful experience for me when it was made. It was very close to my heart. But I think that Neil Jordan really got it, and I think for rather complicated reasons, Brad Pitt got it, and I think that Tom Cruise did a very good job of getting the character of Lestat. To me, it was a movie that transcended all genres and has endured, and I'm very grateful for it, proud of it.
Do you think, looking back on it now, that it was one of the more homoerotic studio movies of the time? Probably now it doesn't, post Brokeback Mountain, it doesn't seem that way to it. You never know what's going to get a laugh sometimes. It doesn't quite seem that way, but I remember the moment in the theater when Antonio Banderas, who was way too old to play Armand, by the way, took Brad Pitt's face in his hands. I remember
Really?
Are they, you know, but do you feel that way?
Well, I thought it was great. Yeah, I thought it was faithful to the spirit of the book. Yes. Right. And that was Neil Jordan and that was David Geffen. Those two brave guys, really.
Yeah. You were, the book had been out for years when a reporter said, you realize you've written a gay allegory. Right.
Actually, that was in the beginning. The book had been out about a year, and a young reporter, I think he was from The Advocate, said that to me. He said, "This is the longest gay allegory in the English language."
Was he being complimentary?
Yes, he was, actually. Okay. And he asked me about all kinds of things in an interview with the vampire, whether this was intentional allegory.
Right.
And I said no, there was no real intention to any of it. And he even compared the description of the theater of the vampires and the chambers underneath the theater to certain clubs that existed in New York.
What kind of clubs?
There were clubs that he knew that were gay clubs.
Do you know these kinds of clubs?
That's why I had to tell him it wasn't intended to be.
Because you wrote those other books, maybe you... This is the Anne side. This is the Sleeping Beauty side. We don't talk about those books.
No.
We don't. I now have her read my manuscripts now that I'm writing Supernatural, but I have an erotic romance coming out on Tuesday, and you don't know anything about it, right?
No, I don't know a thing about it.
Yeah, you also said I'm not touring with you for erotica. That's just too weird.
Well, I don't think it's a good idea.
No, I don't think it's a good idea. This is hard enough. But this is fun. You know, like people ask us to do this, and I enjoy it. Are you enjoying it?
I'm having a wonderful time.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we should allow time for some questions from the audience. We are going to ask you to say your question as loudly as you can. Oh, there's a mic. There's a Phil Donahue mic. And let's go with the gentleman dressed as a tiger. I heard about you backstage.
That is a cool coat. That is very cool.
The character you wrote that is the closest for me is Claudia. And I'm just curious what your inspiration for her was.
Well, at the time that I wrote Claudia, I wasn't aware of any inspiration. You know, I was really functioning as Lestat at that point, like what would happen if they made this child a vampire. And only after it was done did I realize the child would never grow physically, that she was a member of the undead, and that she would be a woman locked in the body of that child forever. And of course that took over the manuscript and became one of the biggest elements in Interview with the Vampire. And I was amazed at how powerful and intense that was for me as I was writing, the frustration and the rage, and how much that has to do with the way we all feel about our bodies, and how our bodies engender misunderstandings in other people, and assumptions, and biases, and prejudices, and sometimes hate. You know, and it's got nothing to do with who we are physically. Did you want the microphone?
The reason I like her so much is just, I myself was adopted, and the fact that she comes from a situation where she has no family, but that's been forced on her, that's bonded with me. She's always been my favorite.
Well, I'm glad to hear it. I'm glad to hear it because she's the heart of that book, really. She really is. She's the heart of the book. And of course, after I was completely finished with the book, someone said, well, this must have to do with the fact that you've just lost a child. You've just lost a little girl. And I said, no, it didn't have anything to do with that. If I'd thought of that, I never could have written this. It would have seemed disrespectful or too strange, too grotesque. But obviously, it does have to do with that I was grieving for my daughter when I created Claudia. But Claudia is a character very different from my daughter in life. And I think if there's one word that has to do with Claudia, it's rage. You know. Thanks for the question.
Have you anyone in mind to play Lestat this time?
Well, I think that there are a lot of people today who can play these vampires on screen because we're in this golden age of fantasy and paranormal romance and supernatural fiction, and we have so many actors coming from England and Australia and Canada and America that are used to doing fantasy roles that it won't be difficult to find someone. I see a number of actors I think that would do very well with the role. One of them is Anson Mount. Good.
President of the Anson Mount Fan Club. VIP seating.
I think Anson Mount would be terrific. I also think Richard Armitage, British actor. I mean, you can't tell in the Hobbit movies because he's so piled up with makeup, but if you've ever seen him in North and South or in MI5, he's absolutely wonderful actor and a gorgeous man. I think Chris Hemsworth could do it, for sure. I think he would be great. There are many different people. Stephen Amell, who plays in the series
Stephen
Arrow,
Amell
I think could do it. I don't know whether he would want to get into the kind of serious acting that would be required, I think, because I think Arrow is lighter. It's a great comic book series, but you know, when I see him on screen, I see Lestat. So I think there are many choices, you know, thanks to all the incredible series and movies we've seen in the last few years.
I think they should go with an unknown. I really do. I think they should have a hunt for it like they did with the new Superman. I think it needs its own Henry Cavill. I mean, people knew who Henry Cavill was, but he wasn't a huge star. And I think whoever plays Lestat should make him a star.
Oh,
that's my plan as your
okay.
collaborator. And Facebook should ultimately decide.
So I have to go here. Is there any hope of either a revival or another musical or stage show for Lestat?
You know, I don't know that there is. I haven't heard anybody being interested. I know that the people who did the original Broadway musical Lestat, they do own the rights, and they could revive it at any time that they want. But I'm not hearing from anybody else wanting to do anything new, and I don't think they're interested in reviving it right now. But they may someday do a revival. So I hope so. Yeah. Okay.
Gentleman in the back, yes.
Well, first of all, I want to say that you've been a great inspiration. That your books have, you know, forced me to learn English when I came to this country because I wanted to read them so much, and so I had to learn. So thank you, both of you, actually, for your books. I have a question about your other chronicles, the Witch Chronicles and the Mummy. Is there any talk about you know, bringing them back? For the people who are younger, you know, start reading them, talking about them, because there's been a lot of talk about Vampire Chronicles, which is wonderful. They're wonderful books, but I think your Witch Chronicles are amazing as well. And the Mummy.
There is actually a lot of interest in the Witching Hour books, but we don't have an offer on the table to do it. There's a lot of interest in TV, and people want to see it as a high-quality cable series, and I'm very interested in that too. And maybe as we proceed with the Lestat movie, we will get quite a bit more interest in the Witching Hour stuff. The Mummy, we get interest periodically, but nothing has happened. Both properties at different times were purchased by studios and did go through development, but they just never got made for various reasons. So they've come close. The Witching Hour has come very close. It was owned by Warner's, and they were very interested in it, but it just didn't work out. They owned both Interview with the Vampire and the Witching Hour books, and they chose to go with Interview with the Vampire and let the other property go. And the Mummy was owned for a long time by Fox Pictures, and James Cameron was actually going to do the Mummy. But then he did the Titanic, and it turned out to be an incredible success.
Worked out for him. So.
Yeah.
We were going to do the Mummy on the Titanic, but it didn't work out.
Right. Well, what basically happened is I never heard from him again. But I can understand. No, but I can understand. I mean, you know, after a success like Titanic, he went in different directions.
What about another Mummy book? Yeah. Look what I started.
No, I would like to do that. It's just a matter of time. It's a wonderful thing to have many different projects that you want to do. You know, it's the opposite for too many people too much of the time, I guess. That they, you know. But I'd like to get to the Mummy and do an update of the Mummy.
Cool. Next question.
Sorry, just that kind of like that I'm able to speak right now is a little astonishing. I'm kind of starstruck. I think it's great that Universal Studios has bought the rights to the books, and I especially love to see Blackwood Farm made into a movie. It's so action-packed, and the ghost scenes are just incredible. And the story itself, the scary dead twin following him around his entire life. When I was younger, I wanted to be a writer, and then I read your books, and someone said, write what you know, and then I read you, and I said, oh crap, I'm gonna have to know it all. You forced me to read the classics, and thank you.
Oh, thank you very much for that. That's a wonderful statement. You know, I don't think we should ever be intimidated by that advice, write what you know, because obviously what you know includes your imagination, what you can think up. And look what Charlotte and Emily Bronte managed to do without ever going out of the little town of Haworth in England. I mean, look what they were able to create with Wuthering Heights and Jane Eyre. And they did all that in that little parsonage in Haworth. And to me, the advice, write what you know, is that can be bad advice. That can be deadening.
Write what you feel.
Yeah,
write what you feel.
Right. I agree. Write what you feel, and I think that's what's most important. Go with what you go where the pain is, go where the pleasure is, and go where the intensity is. Yeah. And I wish you every blessing with your writing.
Hello, Ms. Rice. Hello, Mr. Rice. Thank you for being here in New York to promote your books. My name's Alejandro Morales, and you're my inspiration, Ms. Rice. I actually wrote my own book that was published in July, and I actually dedicated it to you. So
thank you very much.
No, thank you. I actually have a copy for you here. Shameless self-promotion.
That's all right.
That's the only kind, sir. We all do it. Yeah.
We have on iTunes and Amazon. But I just want to say you've been an inspiration to me. I truly enjoy your books, and it's an honor and a privilege to be here to actually meet you in person after reading your work for so long, and thank you for being here.
Thank you very much, and congratulations on your book. Congratulations. Okay.
I guess this would be a twofold question. My question is, at what age did you know that you like writing so much? And then the other part of the question would be, you as a mother, how did you feed into the creativity of his writing? I'm asking because I have a daughter, and all her teachers say, she's 9, that she's a great writer, that they're expecting to see her write books. But then I don't know how to feed into that. I'm not too sure of how to go about helping her go that way.
She should be reading.
Oh,
She should be reading. I mean, that I think was the biggest influence, is living in a house of books and having access to books. There's a story, it may be an urban legend, but the writer Graham Greene, these writing students wrote him a letter, and they said, "Mr. Greene, tell us the 3 things we need to be a great writer." And he wrote back, "A lot of time, a lot of paper, and a lot of pencils." And they said, "What's the time for writing?" He said, "No, it's for reading." And I think raising your child in that kind of environment, but to answer the first part of your question, I didn't plan to become a writer at all. I went off to college thinking I was going to be an actor, and nobody else at college thought I should be. And I didn't get called back for a single play my freshman year, and I had been Mr. Theater at my high school. And I needed an outlet desperately, and I had always loved to read, and I had always been an excellent English student, but I had always thought writing would serve some sort of performance career. And what I had told myself again and again and again was that I didn't have the stamina or the patience to write a novel. And obviously that wasn't true. So you were always very supportive of me going into performance, and it's a blessing to grow up in a house where your parents are actually disappointed that you didn't audition for Juilliard. Most parents are like, "Oh, thank God, he's still going to engineering," you know. But and I had to grow up and meet a lot of, because when you grow up in that, you have nothing to compare it to, and you don't realize what a blessing it is. You have to get older and talk to your writer friends who had to fight to convince everybody that what they were doing was not some idle, vaporous hobby, you know, that they weren't just a lunatic daydreamer. And those were all givens, you know, those things weren't true, that this was totally valid. And I remember I had sold the first book, and I was organizing the chapters of the manuscript on the floor of my room. And I remember one day I came into the room, and this stack of all the great classics had been left right next to it. That she and Dad had gone in there and they'd gotten Great Expectations and all these sort of hardcover editions. And it's like, you can't beat that, folks. If you want to be a writer, you can't beat that kind of love and support. So
I agree. But I wanted to say, I think you're already doing something absolutely wonderful for her, in that you believe in her and you recognize that what she's doing has value. That's what Christopher is talking about.
Yeah.
I think that you
just
that
asking
you think
the question.
It's important
Yeah.
that, because a lot of what I heard as a child from people outside my family was, well, what makes you think you can be a writer? Or what makes you think you're so special? Or, you know, I got quite a bit of that sort of negative talk when I was a kid. Settle down, do something practical, you know, major in education, you know, do something like that. Don't have crazy dreams of being a writer when you go to college. And the fact that you believe in here is everything. And also, I think it's important to realize there are no rules for how somebody does it. She may not write anything for 6 months or a year. She may not write anything for 2 years. And then she may go back and fill up notebook after notebook, or, you know, computer file after computer file. I mean, there are no rules. It's the only rule is get it done.
Right.
Just get it done.
Whatever works.
And believe in yourself, and believe in your own voice and your own characters and your own stories. And don't change things because it takes a while to find the right readership. You know, just stick with your own voice.
Right.
Okay.
Question over there.
Okay. I'm a little starstruck myself as well. I have been reading you for years. The very first book I've read was Witching Hour, and the second was Ramses the Damned. I want to thank you for creating something that I really spent years reading over and over, so much that the book destroyed itself and I had to buy a new copy. And I wanted to thank you especially for creating Ramses, which actually inspired me to create some short stories of my own based on him. But I created a woman instead with his characteristics.
Great.
What I wanted to ask was about Ramses the Damned specifically. You said that you maybe had plans to update him. I was wondering what exactly you had in mind, if anything.
Well, I don't have a clear picture yet, but I think if I do go back to Ramses, I'll bring him into the present time. I'll do the novel right now, because that's what's exciting to me at this point in my writing life. I would not want to go back to the time when it was set, the early part of the 20th century, and start there. I'd want to bring him right now and maybe flash back on why we're in the present time.
That's what I was hoping, actually.
Yeah, yeah, that's what I'd like to do.
Do you have time for just one more question?
Sure.
Hi. Okay, so my question is, I've always kind of tried to picture what Lestat's music would sound like, and I've got lots of ideas of what his music would sound like, and lots of people that I have a Lestat playlist of songs that remind me of Lestat. And I was wondering if they redo the movies, would you want to have his music, and if so, what would you model it after? What other singers would you relate with Lestat?
I can tell you, when I was writing the Vampire Lestat, the music, the rock music I was listening to was Jim Morrison and the Doors. And the song in particular that I thought sounded to me like Lestat would do it was L.A. Woman. And I listened to that song over and over and over again. And that was the sound. And I also loved the fact that Jim Morrison had a beautiful voice. He actually had a great tenor voice. And that's who Lestat was to me. The other person that very much makes me think of Lestat is John Bon Jovi. And especially...
You dedicated the book to John.
Well, I did, didn't I? Yes.
Yes.
But that's because...
But my name and Eric Shaw Quinn's name are above John Bon Jovi. And so if maybe he tries a little harder at Christmas, he can move up the dedication page.
Well, John Bon Jovi, I think, especially his song Bad Medicine. I like that. There are a number of songs of his that I listened to while I was writing Prince Lestat. Not while writing, but in the morning, before getting ready to write. So that's where I am. But, I have a lot of different loves when it comes to music. But I love all the old guys that came of age in the 60s, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles, of course. But I don't know how it would be handled now, but I would hope it would sound a lot like L.A. Woman, his rock music.
I think that's all the time we have.
That is all the time we have for the conversation.
Amazing New York audience.
Thank you all.